Hi, my name's Jackie. I'm the Schools Liaison Officer here at St Peter's College, Oxford. I'm just making this presentation with a particular audience in mind, and that's the students who were unable to come on the English residential that was due to take place in March 2020, that unfortunately had to be cancelled due to the coronavirus. My contact details are on the screen at the moment. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions relating to anything that I touch on today. Had you come on the residential, you would have been staying with us at St Peter's College, and you'd have entered here through our Porter's Lodge. Just get the mouse to work. Coming in through the lodge into Linton Quad, and these are two different aspects of Linton Quad, so it immediately gives you a sense that St Peter's has quite a mix of kind of architectural styles. That's a view from the top of Perodo Building, which is our newest building, looking down over Hannington Quad and Shavas Quad here. And you can see their new building, which has bedrooms, student bedrooms in it that look a bit like this. This is one example. Had you been staying with us, obviously you'd have stayed in a bedroom, either one of the ones in new building or possibly in Matthew's building, which tend to be the first year accommodation. You'd have been eating in hall as well, of course. There's hall on a particularly busy day. You might also have seen some squirrels because they are our unofficial mascot as a result of being quite populous around the Mulberry Quad, which is like the back garden of the college. As you'll be completely aware, St Peter's College is one of several undergraduate colleges in Oxford, and a visit to Oxford very often for people who are considering applying involves visiting a few colleges just to get a feel for which one or ones might be most appealing for whatever reason. Typical points of comparison might be things like distance from the town centre. Some colleges are further afield, like St Hugh's. Some are very central, like St Edmund Hall. You might be influenced by things like architectural style. St Catherine's would be an example of very modern architectural style, and that would obviously contrast with Christ Church, which has famously grand buildings. St Peter's College has its own unique blend of features and factors that might influence you in your decision making. St Peter's is extremely centrally located, so we're here. That is the train station just there, and that's the Bodleian Library just there, so you can see we're sort of between those two things. We're also nestled in amongst the shopping, really, because Corn Market is one of the main shopping thoroughfares, and High Street, Queen Street here are also busy shopping streets, and we have the Westgate Centre here, which isn't on this map, but so our proximity to everything is something that our students tend to really appreciate. In terms of size, the college is sort of medium sized. We've got about 350 undergraduates and over 200 postgraduates, so a really nice sized community. Everyone can find their crowd, and it is really the people at St Peter's that are probably its greatest asset. It's true to say that every Oxford college will identify the friendliness of their student and tutor communities as a real strength, and I think that is probably generally true. So you'll probably hear this from any college, but I can certainly say, having come to St Peter's, not having been a student at St Peter's, I've been struck by just how welcoming and friendly everyone is. It's an incredibly inclusive community. One way in which that's come home to me particularly is that in my role as Schools Liaison Officer, I work with student helpers who are willing to give up their time and energies for doing outreach work. Access Rep Nandeepa there, talking to some students at an event, and our other student helpers here, just a handful of them, working on the open day. And student helpers are giving up their time with such pleasure because they are genuinely passionate about making as wide a range of young people as possible, from as broad a range of backgrounds as possible, making them aware of what a great place St Peter's is and making them feel welcome to come and visit, come and stay, and possibly to come and apply. One of our student helpers is Lily. She is an English student, which is why I featured her here. She is also the manager of the St Peter's College Bar. She fits a lot into her time. She mentions here that one of the great things about studying English at St Peter's for her is working with our tutors. That's Professor Marina Mackay and Professor Abby Williams. They're both wonderful and very lovely. They aren't the only people you would be taught by. You'd probably be taught by other tutors based elsewhere for particular papers, but much of your teaching would happen within St Peter's. Of course, while you're at St Peter's, you will be part of a community that is much bigger than just English students. You'll be part of a community that represents academic subjects from across all the divisions and faculties, with a couple of exceptions, classics, computer science and psychology. Those would be the exceptions, but with those exceptions, we at St Peter's College teach almost everything by way of undergraduate subjects. And most colleges teach most things, but it's always worth just double checking what is taught. Obviously, if you're interested in English, then you're in a great place, but you would be making friends with people who might be studying things wildly different to you, which makes for a really nice, diverse and rich kind of community. So while you were visiting us, one of the things I'd hoped to do was just to go on a stroll, so you could walk from St Peter's College, which comes up as work for me because I can't make Google forget that it's where I work, but that is St Peter's College. We'd have walked the 10 minutes or so to the Bodleian Library and the Radcliffe Camera, which is part of the Bodleian Library. It's just a particular building. And those are both places where you can work and study and where certain English books are held. And then we'd have walked on from there to the English Faculty Library to have a look around there. So the Bodleian Library, quite famous, and some of the English faculty collection is stored in here, so you can work in any part of it, but certain books up there will be of use to you during your course. Some books are also in the upper camera here, so again you can work in any part of the camera, but you'll find certain books for the course in there. Slightly less beautiful, but beautiful in its own way, is the English faculty, which has, it's a really light, airy, open space. It has loads and loads of books. It has a large lecture theatre. That's actually on an open day, so it's a slightly different audience than usual, but just to give you a sense of it. Your lectures would take place here, but you would have tutorials and seminars, typically in college or possibly in another college if you were doing a paper taught by a tutor elsewhere. So the teaching breaks down into tutorials, seminars and lectures predominantly, and like I say, you'd expect to be doing the tutorial part of that in colleges, but you'd come to the central faculty building certainly for your lectures. You have probably begun familiarising yourself with the English course at Oxford and possibly comparing it with other English courses. That's a really sensible thing to do because every English course is really quite different. If so, you'll be aware that the first year gives you, in a sense, it bookends the chronology of English literature by starting early and late all at once. So it presents you with the early medieval and then the 1830 to the present day in the first year, and then in the second year you get to choose a pathway from these two options in which you will be focusing on, depending on the route you go, focusing on everything that comes in between, but possibly with this option focusing more on the early. I'll click on this link because if you are interested in finding out a bit more about the English course, lots of information there on the page put together by the faculty itself, including some general information about the course and then some practical headline information there. I'll say as well that if you go to this page, you can find two really useful videos. One is Dr. Marion Turner talking about the English course. She breaks it down a little bit into what it would look like, what a typical day or week might be, and talks a bit about the admissions process. And there's a mock English interview. I'll say a bit more about interviews later, but that's a really useful resource as well, with a current student who participated in a kind of a mock interview just to illustrate what that kind of conversation might be like. We would have talked while you were visiting us briefly about UCAS, about the admissions process and the application timeline, starting with the UCAS application. I think it's still quite early to be thinking about this, so I wouldn't want anyone to be starting to feel anxious about this, but just to give you the headline dates, you would potentially want to be starting to think about things in June and onwards, and those things would be, confirming in your mind that you know what course you want to apply for, that you really do want to apply for English at Oxford. Getting familiar enough with Oxford and the colleges to decide whether you want to apply to a college or whether you want to make an open application. It's exactly the same process. It's simply a matter of whether or not you say, yes, I wish to make a preference, and then you state what that preference is, or no, I wish to make an open application. The latter being a way of just allowing the university to allocate you to a particular college based on various things, including sort of numbers of applications that year. June onwards, good time to be thinking about your personal statement and what you want to go in it, and also talking perhaps to your school or college or a particular teacher who you think is going to be writing your academic reference. If you want to be looking ahead, you could be thinking about checking out the ELAT, which is the admissions test for English, and looking into what that involves. And all of that is working towards the deadline of 15th of October for submission. So unlike the regular UCAS deadline, for Oxford and Cambridge it's submission on the 15th, and that's because it needs to allow time for all of this to happen before decisions in January. So the next step after that would be taking the ELAT test, which you take in your school or college. Main thing probably to think about in June time or shortly after that, certainly early in the autumn term, is ensuring that your school is registered as a centre to allow you to sit the ELAT, and that you have been registered to sit it. The test is on the 4th of November for everyone in their respective schools and colleges. Written work, you'll be submitting written work by a deadline of the 10th of November. And you'll be told, once you've submitted your application, you'll be notified of what written work you need to supply. And there's some advice which I'll signpost you to in just a moment on the faculty pages about the kind of written work that is preferred. And then if you're shortlisted for interview, you'd be coming in mid-December, and then decisions will be made in time for you to get notified in January. How are you actually assessed is a question that I often get asked, and it's, I hope, an encouraging thing to see how much information is gathered on you by Oxford, because it's really a way of the university trying to ensure that we have as much information about you as possible, and that we are therefore able to make a really informed decision. So you'll be giving us lots of information about yourself via your UCAS application form. We'll see your GCSE grades, any AS results if you have them. That's less and less likely. But your predicted A-level grades, your school reference or teacher reference, and of course your personal statement, which I'll say a bit more about later. That's why it's in red. And then, in addition to everything that we get through UCAS, we will also ask you for written work, as I mentioned. And I'll show you where the link is to find out a little bit more about the kind of written work to submit. But usually we would say just send something that you have written in the course of your A-level studies. It does need to be marked by a teacher. The admissions test and how you get on in that is something else that is factored in. If you're interviewed, then of course that is factored in, and also we factor in contextual information. I'll say a bit more about each of those things that are in red in just a moment. But the intention is therefore to gather as much as possible on every candidate, so that we're giving everyone a chance to present us with good reasons to take them seriously. And what are tutors looking for? Well, one very practical thing is that you meet the subject requirements. So just be sure that you've checked, in the case of English, that you've checked what does the department actually say it wants. So requirements, most students will have an A-level in English literature or in combined Lang Lit, and the standard conditional offer is 3 A's. And if you think, I'm not sure if entirely meet those requirements, do please drop me an email and I'll see if I can help, because things aren't necessarily black and white, but those would be the typical requirements. Tutors will be looking, perhaps above all things, once you meet the basic requirements, for evidence of your ability to think independently and critically. And that will come through to them partly through your personal statement and partly through your teacher reference, as well then as through the ELAT test and how you write there. If you can show in your personal statement that you are questioning assumptions, you are thinking critically, you are looking at texts both inside and outside of your course in a way that shows a kind of a keenness to push yourself, to challenge conventional wisdom, and to engage in lively debate that might be going on around your subject, around texts and around genres, that would be really good evidence of an ability to think independently and critically. A genuine interest in and suitability for this course, well, this course is what's important there really. A tutor will want to see that you really know what English at Oxford is going to be like, and that you are really excited about the prospect of this course and all that it entails, because you will spend a fair number of hours each week doing the course itself. It is by no means the only thing you will do with your time. You'll have lots of time for doing things outside of the course, but it's going to make up a good chunk of what you're doing. So making sure that you are genuinely enthused about the content of this course and conveying that in your personal statement will be wise. Evidence of your academic potential to succeed, well, that's conveyed partly through things like your GCSE results, but certainly also your A-level predictions and what your school or teacher says about you. It will be shown as well in your test and in your interview if you're invited to interview. And motivation and commitment, that will come through in various ways, but if we go back to the personal statement, if it's clear that you are spending time and energy outside of your A-level studies in things relating to English, and by that I don't mean listing lots of books that maybe you think you should have read or intend to read, but I mean giving evidence of thinking that you've been doing. It might just be a few extra books that you've been reading, but that you've really been reading them and that you've really been thinking about them. That would show genuine motivation and commitment. There is more useful information about all of this back on the pages that I showed you before, but this is a separate page. So if you go here, you can see the section I mentioned before. This is advice about written work and some advice about the ELAT, including directing you to the specimen papers and past papers and interviews. There's some advice there, although I'll say a little bit more about that in due course. I hope that this doesn't really need clarifying, but just to demystify the idea that Oxford might in any way be looking for people from particular backgrounds or particular schools, we're really not. Oxford will, however, be looking at people in their context. So we aren't interested in what background you have or what school type you might be coming to us from, but we will look at those things as ways of helping us understand your level of achievement so far, and possibly to understand why attainment might not be so high if you may be at a school where average attainment levels aren't as high, for example. So we are not actively looking for anyone in particular, but we will look at these things and bear them in mind to try and help us give everyone the fairest kind of scrutiny as applicants. Something else that tutors aren't looking for is extracurricular detail that is kind of irrelevant to the subject. So it's not that your achievements and pastimes outside of your academic work aren't of interest. It's more that unless they have a direct bearing on you as a student of the subject that you wish to apply for, there's going to be a limit to how far academic tutors will be interested in that. They will probably be extremely impressed, but given that you've got relatively little space to talk about things in a personal statement, you would want to focus instead on your love of and passion for the subject rather than more general achievements. So personal statements, I guess given the constraints that you are under, I would stress again the fact that you want to present a tutor who might be interviewing you with as much as possible by way of springboard for conversation. So I would say that about 80% and certainly no less of your content in your personal statement really should be about your academic subject. And it can touch on, of course, your other A-level subjects, but as much as possible try to demonstrate how those link into your chosen subject for higher study, and indicate awareness of overlaps and of how they feed into each other, and also of how the skills that you've obtained from those other subjects help equip you to be the best possible student of your chosen subject. So in other words, as much as you can, anything that isn't explicitly about your chosen subject needs to be made to feel relevant to your presentation of yourself as a strong candidate in English in this case. And of course, like I said, there should be plenty about what you've been reading and thinking outside of the course that relates to English. There is advice here from the university. You can see the link there, so you could have another look at that there. So in terms of thinking about English beyond your curriculum, that's what we call supercurricular studies. It really just means, apologies if you've already come across this term, it really just means if we put English A-level here, it means everything that sort of feeds off it but is technically outside the confines of the A-level course. So just to suggest a few Oxford-based resources, you have here suggested reading and resources from the faculty itself, including some links to recent research that's been done. You've got over 300 English faculty podcasts to listen to, all about different topics. I suspect many of them would be things that are completely new. Certainly they'd be new to me, so they could open up interesting avenues for you to consider exploring. This is a brilliant collection of freely available resources, and there's lots here. There's podcasts and dialogues and blogs. So the Great Writers Inspire is that's a great place to start. And if you're interested in post-colonial writing, there's fantastic stuff here about post-colonial writers. If you look at Writers Make Worlds, it's actually hosted by an organisation within Oxford now called Torch, which specialises in the humanities, and their work on post-colonial writers is fantastic and really fascinating. Obviously, though, you can also do lots of supercurricular reading that is not from Oxford resources. Radio 4 is a great place to go because this could be a break from screen time. It could just be something where you just have your headphones in, as with the podcasts actually. So you've got an Open Book, which is a weekly show presented by Mariella Frostrup, and she talks with writers and people in the publishing world about latest developments in literature. A good read is where 3 books are talked about by different people, usually celebrities, and that might just make you aware of titles and writers that you hadn't heard of before, might pique your interest. There's loads of other, as you can see, loads of other resources here, including the feature they did recently of novels that shaped our world, so that could be a good place to look. Equally, if you haven't come across it, there's a show called In Our Time, which has been running for years, and there are archives of it on the BBC Sounds website. All of this can be found on the BBC Sounds app. And The Written World is one that explores across 5 episodes how writing has shaped our intellectual history. That would be, I think, a really good one for English students. That's slightly less literary, which most of this is about literature, whereas this will be a little bit more thinking about actually the written world as something more tangible, thinking about the act of writing and of creating language. Okay, I said I'd say a little bit about tests. I won't say too much because these are a bit of a way off, and I also think it's probably the case that you will talk more about these with your teachers in due course. The aptitude test is called the ELAT for English, and if I click here, I should be able to open up a PDF. there. That's a leaflet produced by the organisation that actually puts the test together, which gives you all the sort of basic information about how you register, dates and links, and just the nuts and bolts essential info. Sorry, that's just taken me away from the slide. I'll just get back to it. The information on the ELAT website is hopefully all fairly self-explanatory, but as I mentioned before, there is also some guidance on that page that I linked out to on the faculty website, so you could have a look there, and you could look at specimen papers and past papers. If you do have any further questions about the ELAT, please do drop me an email, and I will do my best to answer anything that you are wondering at this point. Interviews, I'll just say now that should you get to that stage, the interview, it is honestly not a scary experience other than your own nerves. Your own nerves probably make it a bit scary, but other than that, you'll be greeted by the two lovely tutors that you saw before. Here's Abby, and effectively you'll be given an opportunity to have a sort of mini tutorial. You'll probably do this twice, maybe 3 times. And it's in a very, very few cases you might end up having a 4th interview, but that is unlikely. They won't last any longer than half an hour, but they are just a chance for the tutors to chat to you in the way that they would talk to you in a tutorial. So they'll be seeing really, would this student thrive in the tutorial system, that way of learning where you have 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 chats with tutors. Does that suit you? And the best way of assessing that is by having one of those kinds of chats with you. So it really isn't meant to be scary. The things that are likely to be covered in it will be questions that arise from your personal statement about what you've been reading and what you've been thinking. Possibly questions relating to texts in your A-level courses if you've mentioned them. There'll be some questions where you're sort of invited to apply your existing knowledge to new situations. So you might be asked about a genre, or perhaps given a bit of text that you aren't familiar with, things that perhaps you haven't mentioned specifically, but you'd only be asked about them in a way that assumed you didn't know about them, but it was just a way of seeing if you could apply the knowledge and the skills that you've built up in your A-level course to something new and different. You will probably in at least one of the interviews be given a text to read. You would have that as pre-reading material, and you could sit and read that quietly in a dedicated room, and then you'll be called to come and have your interview after you've had your pre-reading time. So you'd then be asked about, what were your first impressions of that text, and if you submitted, and you may be asked about written work that you've submitted. If it comes up in conversation, then great. It might not. I'll just say again, you could go back to this link and have a look at the example interview that they put on the faculty website, as that's quite a helpful way of illustrating the kinds of tone of the conversation. Finally then, as I mentioned, we do look at candidates in the round, and what that really means is that we're trying to assess the application and the applicant in the fairest possible way. So Oxford will be looking at your school and your own geographical location or residential location, and other factors such as whether your care experience, and all of those things will be weighed in to consider you as an applicant, and to help us really understand and contextualise what you've achieved academically so far, and to try to have a realistic sense of what you might be able to achieve. So it's really not the case that we think that everyone is coming from the same sorts of backgrounds and have had the same kinds of experiences. Clearly that isn't the case, and we try to look at everyone as much as possible in the round to give everyone, all applicants, the fairest possible chance. So it's a real shame that I've not got to meet you in person on this occasion, but I hope I will do in some way before too long. I'll say again, any questions about any of this, please do get in touch. Just drop me an email, and I will try to help out in whatever way I can, or find out the answers if I don't know them. Thanks ever so much for your time tuning into this, and look forward to meeting you soon.